Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Good evening and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. Tonight we're going to bring you a very insightful discussion, and we have got a fantastic guest with myself tonight, Trudy Barrow, as we explore this topic of AI and imagination, crafting creativity in the digital age. Now, we all know artificial intelligence is transforming the way we teach, learn, create. But when it comes to subjects like design technology and art and creating, where hands-on making and human integrity has always been at the heart of learning, how does AI fit in? Could it be a partner, or does it risk making students passive designers? And to explore this topic tonight, we're joined by Trudy. Trudy is award-winning design and technology educator, consultant, and advisor, and she's won the 2022 James Dyson Association Excellent Award. There is probably somewhere in the background hidden away there for Trudy, and she works with a great array of schools and educators, and I know she's very passionate about sustainability and the role of AI in design learning. So it's going to be a perfect and brilliant conversation tonight as we really explore topics of, can AI be truly creative? Is it remixing human ideas? How does it work with our early years, and how can we balance it? So whether you are an AI enthusiast, a skeptic, or just curious about how it's shaping the future of creativity, this is going to be a fantastic conversation. So good evening, Trudy, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So can you give our audience a little bit about you, and what your passion is with education, with technology, and with AI, just to give a bit of a flavour?
So I have been in education for 10 plus years. I left the classroom in July as a design and technology teacher and a previous head of department. Before I was a teacher, I worked in the theatre. So I was a theatre designer for the National Theatre on the South Bank in the UK. And I worked in what was called the Digital Drawing and Design Office there. And I decided that I wanted to do a PGCE and was umming and ahhing about whether to do it in design and technology or in art. Design and technology fit my skill sets better. So I took the leap and did a PGCE relatively late. And since the release of ChatGPT in 2022, I have been exploring AI in design education. My background coming from the digital design office at the theatre was that I've always been very involved with digital design in one way or another. And I sort of took that love of digital design across from the theatre into education. I was proficient on computer-aided design and Photoshop, and I was always experimenting and pushing those things. So then when I became a teacher, I carried on pushing those things and exploring those things. So it became kind of a natural progression that when generative AI dropped in the mainstream with that release of ChatGPT in 2022, end of 2021, was it? Or end of 2022, it's all been blur. A lot of educators sort of jumped onto the text-to-text large language models, exploring how it could be used in education. And because of my background and my interests and passions, I was exploring that, but I went straight in with both feet, exploring image generation and what that would mean in education. Yeah.
So that's fascinating background, because that really leads to where your passion is as an educator. I had a TA who worked in theatre design, and the stuff that she could create and big picture, and it was incredible in terms of that. I just want a quick word to say thank you to a few key people who have helped put this show together. Kilo, who are winning the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. Students can instantly and simultaneously create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Over 1 million educators and students already using Kilo and to make the world a more thoughtful place. So join them today at Kilio, KIALO-edu.com. And also, this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Education, publishers of professional development books and resources to support great teaching. Last week, I had the honor of talking to Zach Groschel about his new book about just getting people to talk about instructional design. And if you go to johncattbookshop.com, you can explore the full range and also use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Now, we were talking about this idea of, was it AI, was it late 2022, wasn't it, that really came in, generative AI. And you started to elicit your purpose and what interested you.
Mhm.
And most look to the text-to-text style, where it had quite an easy UI that you could put something in an iterative and go back and forwards. But where did you see the vision for design technology and actually how you could potentially use it? So what inspired you to explore that even more?
So I think I started to look at image to image and text to image first, and then image to image AI generation. And I think that there were a lot of us in the education community that definitely jumped in with 2 feet, and I realized that there were a lot of experiments being done with the core subjects and with writing in particular, and with inputting prompts and getting outputs within text to text. And I fell in love with a certain tool that became a bit addictive. In those early days of the first time you try an image generator and you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that that's just come out of this tool. So I started experimenting and pushing that, and then I started to think, well, how could this be put into my teaching? How could I create resources with this? How could I expand my own personal creative practice and think and explore it for myself? But then how could I explore it for my students? Obviously, there were ramifications that, were there from the outset. So I had concerns around, oh my gosh, what's this going to mean for copyright? What's this going to mean for safeguarding? Students are going to fall in love with this and they're going to run with it faster than teachers are going to get their head around it. What's going to happen there? Like, how are the design education community going to handle this? What are the implications? And I know we're going to get into some of those implications. But I think that the best way for me to get to really unpick all of that was just to keep playing with it. And I always say, because I'm in design education, that when I use the word play, I really use the word play with like a reverence to the word. I'm not using the word play with flippantly. I really think that play is an entry into learning, and I really think that play is an entry into designing. So being in both play to me is essential component of design education. So I knew that the best way for me to learn was to play. So I played a lot and made a lot of resources, and then started talking about it and talking to other people about it, and then started to sort of get into those conversations to unpick some of those ramifications. I think that there was a bit of pushback as well from the community. That it wasn't all rosy when I first started talking about this. I definitely think that I was jumping up and down screaming about it, or I felt like I was jumping up and down screaming about it, going, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is fantastic. This is going to open loads of doors. This is going to have massive impact on education. It's going to have massive impact on design education in particular. There's lots of issues here we need to talk about, we need to address. But But I would say that the general attitude that I was met with was, oh my gosh, this is all new. It could be a fad. It's just it could be a gimmick, and we're not really going to get our heads around this because we, and when I say we, I mean education, state education is so bogged down at the minute with surviving and the incoming Ofsted inspection that I was currently dealing with at my setting at the time. And there was always a reason to sort of say, can't deal with that yet, Trudy. We can't deal with that yet, Trudy. That's too much. Both, within whole school setting, and I still see schools going down that road of, whoa, let's just wait and see what happens. But also within my subject.
A lot to unpack there. And I think we'll come back to this idea of play in a bit, because I love my time in reception because it's all about purposeful play. And I know we have both young children, we're looking at play. And I think that concept of play is a really interesting one, because we don't have time to play within confined parameters to actually really explore. But let's go back to the attitude a little bit. Have you seen attitudes change over the last, I can't believe it's only like nearly 3 years, isn't it, since generative AI has come in? But often there's, on one day, a really new project or a new thing that's come out that's going to be amazing. We jump on the bandwagon. Okay, no, this is too much. And then we find a middle ground. Have you seen that in the D&T community?
Yeah, attitudes have massively shifted and massively changed over that time. At first, when I felt like I was jumping up and down screaming about this, like, everybody try it, everybody use it. I want to talk to you about this. I want to talk about the issues around this. I want to talk to you about the magic of this. And I want to use it and play with it. There were a lot of people that were just too busy and too swamped to really take on anything that was new. And there was also a sense of, well, let's just wait and see what happens with this. There was also, in D&T specifically, the first response that I remember getting from the design and technology community and my colleagues at the time was relatively negative, because the first thing that the design and technology community did was panic about cheating. And I know that was across other subjects as well, but panic about how can we mark coursework if students can generate images? How do we know it's their own work? How do we address AI being used in coursework? How do we address, because I delivered an NEA, that the NEA became there was a fear around that. And there was a fear around it undervaluing creativity. And there were loads of headlines, weren't there, about copyright infringement, deep fake headlines. And there was also the background of sci-fi. There was a lot of teachers that were really reluctant to try this because they believed that it would infringe on their privacy, or that the robots would come and kill them in their sleep, all of this sort of stuff that, we chuckle about it now, but at the same time, that does come from somewhere, and that comes from sort of the reluctance to address it at first. But then over time, I've seen a change. Once the Department for Education sort of said, once we had a new government and the Department for Education said, yeah, actually, we're going to address this, we're going to do this, we're going to start to work on projects, and we're going to invest in projects and talk about governance and policy forming and safeguarding, general safety. I think that then the top-down approach happened. But there was a real sort of push from voices talking about this, getting excited about this. And I've been privileged to be part of one of the Department for Education projects, which is writing resources for training materials, sort of entry level into AI, as in all use cases for AI. But obviously I come from a design background and an arts background. So hopefully I've been able to sort of represent those practical subjects and those design-based subjects in that work. But I do think it's shifted. I also did a lot of work with the exam boards, because I was one of the first people to sort of, like I said, scream about this stuff. I spoke to Edexcel quite early on and reviewed some of their policies, and I spoke to AQA and actually ran some webinars on the design and technology NEAs through product design, textiles, food, A-level and GCSE. We ran some webinars to sort of set out the policy that AQA had, but also my role in that was to sort of showcase some of the positive things that you could do and some of the ways that as an educator you could use AI to push creativity and open doors and also save workload for yourself as an educator. So that was really good. And I think once sort of some of the big voices and big platforms got involved, I think then the teachers I was meeting stopped talking about robots coming to kill them in their sleep and started to realize that actually, yeah, this is something that could save me time, and actually it's not going to infringe on my privacy the way that I thought it was. I'm going to try this. But I think also the one thing I really should say is that one of the things I was jumping up and down about was that the horse had bolted and it was happening whether educators liked it or not. And the students were going to do it. And we needed to understand what that meant. And we needed to get ahead of it and understand it and put in guardrails. And as the adults start to create tools and create programs that could be safe for students.
And I think in some ways, it's caused us to have these conversations. I don't think we've had something in education that has come from many people and unknown to something that at the forefront and could disrupt the way we think, the way we teach, the way we learn, the way we approach what school is and what the future looks like in such a way. So having these conversations, whether it is coming from the sci-fi, the robot's going to kill us, actually are ethical, but they are going to be ethical conversations. Yeah. And really, really important when we look at what AGI is and everything else going forward, we've got to have those conversations. In some ways, it's given us depth that we've never really explored before. And I think one of your things you said earlier is we're too busy and too swamped. And we say that too much about the curriculum. It's too busy and too swamped. We want to go into depth. And we're finding that as teachers. So we've got to find where is that middle ground that we can really explore these things in the right way.
Yeah, and innovate. Yeah. There's not space at the moment for the average teacher to innovate in their practice because they've got so many deadlines to meet, so few hours in the day, that the pressure on teachers is through the roof. So that means that there is a squeeze on innovation, and that's a shame. And I sort of think in the last couple of years, AI sort of sat in that innovation camp. Now it's becoming more like, well, it's something that we're all going to have to do. But for the last couple of years, it's definitely been sort of well, you can try it if you've got time. And most educators would turn around and go, oh, I don't have time. So I think now it's starting to get really exciting because schools and trusts are writing policies and investing in tools that they're comfortable with, they've done the due diligence on, and are training their staff on those tools and on those programs. And now we're seeing like much more of a rollout with governance in mind and policy in mind and health and safety in mind. So it's getting exciting. Well, it's been exciting. It's been very exciting, hasn't it? The last 2-3 years. And now I suppose we're just on that sort of, it's now becoming mainstream and in most classrooms.
Yeah, we've almost tipped the balance now, haven't we? That we've had that exciting time. But do you think it has changed? Should we talk about innovation and creativity? Mm-hmm. Do you think it's changed how we define that?
So I don't think so. I don't think it's changed what it means to be creative. I think we need to think of AI as a team member that sits alongside us. Some tools are just tools. It's an AI tool that will do one job. It may be a tool that can convert something into something else or augment something into something else. But then some of the big LLMs can be used more as a collaborator and almost like a team member. And I think it's almost like having another colleague, or even if you use the memory on some of these things and you feed it all of your thoughts and your your philosophies, then it can also be a bit of a mirror back to yourself. If you prompt it correctly, it can sort of almost be like having a second version of yourself that remembers everything. That can be really, really useful. So I don't think it changes what it means to be creative. I think it can expedite some of the processes. But I was just saying to somebody recently that I think that in design, I think that there's this worry that it means that anybody can design anything. But I don't think that's the case, because I think you still need to have your fundamental knowledge of what it means to be a good designer, to then prompt the AI and ask the right questions to pull out of it that higher level thinking. So I think if you've already got a really solid understanding of what it means to be a good designer and already have a design eye and be good at it, and you could be excellent at it. Whereas if you have no knowledge, you're just going to say, design, for example, design me a chair is not going to get you, is not being a good designer. But to prompt with ergonomics in mind and anthropometrics in mind and the target market and the user and all of this sort of knowledge that we teach within design and technology and other design subjects. And if you use that as a prompt, then you are having sort of a collaborator with you. So I think you can iterate alongside having this co-pilot, if you like, or companion machine to support your own thinking. So no is my answer. I don't think it changes our understanding of what it means to be creative.
If anything, it's actually made it more concrete what human creativity is in some ways, in that regard. And you're thinking about novices and experts. There's a lot of research out there, and especially in terms of efficiency side of it, as well as the creative side, where it will deepen the understanding if you're an expert already. You can go deeper and explore things. Like when the calculator was introduced, actually it meant we could do harder math and we could go and see into that thing. And I think we can't just, and it's the same thing, we can't just Google something. We need to understand the context and the foundational knowledge. So
you've got to ask the right questions.
Yes. Yeah.
It doesn't happen in a vacuum. You have to be able to provide the input, and providing that input means that you've got to have understood what you're actually asking. And then to use AI very effectively, you should then be able to critique your output and re-input to get something even better. So that foundational knowledge of what it is you're asking, and then the critical evaluation of what you've got back is essential. And we have to teach it, but we also have to recognize that doesn't mean that everybody's going to become amazing at everything overnight. It means that the really good people at whatever it is already are going to be able to really push themselves further, or push their work further with their new companion next to them.
So thinking about that base knowledge, that foundation, and then being that companion, have you got any examples where you've seen that, so that AI isn't diminishing the human creativity, is not doing it for us, but how have you used it within your lessons or working with others that AI is that companion, and what kind of things have you created from that?
So I think that obviously for teachers, probably the biggest companion is a workload one. That's sort of the first thing that teachers latch onto is, oh my gosh, this is going to save me time, that precious commodity that none of us have in education. That's amazing. So I think that was sort of the first thing that I really realized I could do. And I know that, again, in education, a lot of people were trying that for text to text. And I was sort of thinking, well, in my visual subject of design and technology, how can I save some of my time? So I think one of the first things that I did was I was designing I was drawing an A3 resource that I was going to hold up in a lesson the next morning. And it was a last minute lesson plan. It was a year 10 group who had finished a project early. And we were waiting for the exam board to release the context for the year 11 NEA, which comes out towards the end of year 10. So I was going to do a mini project just for a couple of weeks. And it wasn't like a part of my long-term plan. It was just that we'd finished a bit early. So I thought, well, okay, so I'd planned my scheme of work, my short scheme of work, and it involved me creating a design board, and holding it up in the first lesson. And I'd given myself that job, and I knew that I had to do that job. And I came home that night and I thought, I've got to do this job. And I did it. And it took maybe half an hour of my evening, when I could have been reading Harry Potter to my 6-year-old, 8-year-old, or I could have been having a glass of wine with my husband, or I could have just been resting. But instead I did this. And then the next day I thought, I just wonder if I could have used AI for this. So I entered in a prompt into one of the big AI image generators. Not one that I would necessarily recommend for teacher use, but a big one. So I entered in a prompt that I think it read something like a page full of sketches inspired by the De Stijl art and design movement, drawn in black fine liner with coloured pencil on white paper, vibrant, bold, fill the page, simple designs, go. And it released, essentially, it showed me these 4 options, as image generators often do, provide you with 4 or 6 options. And this one provided me with 4 options. And I looked at these 4 options, and I looked at the page of work, and I thought, gosh, they're really similar. Not perfect by any stretch. There were lots of hallucinations in the output. I was asking for key rings, and some of the key rings were all off, and it wasn't perfect. But the general learning goal that I had wanted the message, if you like, that I'd wanted to get over to my class of year 10s was fill your page, use a lot of colour, keep them simple, use colour pencils. This is how you outline with fine liner. And it had done all of those things really clearly in 30 seconds rather than the 30 to 60 minutes that I had spent. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a game changer. So the next morning, or in the next time I saw the class, I put it up on the board, but all 4 images. And I explained to them that I had generated this with artificial intelligence, and they used it as an exemplar for what they were doing by hand. But then we also had this really interesting conversation around, and this must have been really early in 2023 when this happened. We had this really interesting conversation around hallucinations. Oh, look, it's got that bit wrong, and it's got that bit wrong. And we had a really interesting conversation about, can you tell it's AI? What bits can you recognize as not being perfect? And it was just my sort of first experience of, oh wow, this is big, and this is really going to change things. And then my sort of second sort of big aha moment was having image generator on my phone, and having my phone in my pocket, and having some, let's just say, relatively naughty boys in my class who were off task. And again, it was a drawing lesson. So I hadn't been experimenting too far away from what I started with, but these boys were off task, and I was able to go up to them and differentiate on the fly and pull them back into the lesson by creating a resource on my phone and showing them an exemplar of something they were interested in. So I think it was lamps or lights, and I did sort of a mashup prompt of making them Star Wars themed, and went, look, I just made this in 30 seconds. And, if this can do it in 30 seconds and it's all right, you can definitely do this, and look at this, and this could inspire you. And it pulled them back into the lesson, and they were really excited. And then when things started to get really exciting was when I started to do image to image and started to input sketches into AI, and then get renders back, and seeing students blown away by their own work then becoming sort of magicked, and the motivation that gave them and the engagement went up. And obviously I was trying this maybe a little bit too early, because I then thought, maybe the student shouldn't be doing this, and maybe I should be checking out, doing my due diligence. And then I pulled way back, and then did a lot of due diligence on the right tools and the IP, for example, and knowing which tools were right for student use, and how could that work, and would it be, there was a lot to unpick. But once I'd unpicked it, there are some fantastic opportunities for student use as well as workload and teacher use.
Yeah, and if any of our audience haven't seen the examples that Trudy shared, go and find her on LinkedIn. There's some fascinating examples, especially that image to image, because it gives pupils, if they're prototyping, whatever age almost, isn't it, where they can draw something. Actually, what does this look like with the right textures in it, with the right materials in it? What's it look like in the room? And actually, it's almost, as you're saying, it's a thought partner and a companion where you can go back and be iterative on your own a little bit before you have that support of a real expert to help. And you think you may have had a couple as a student, you may have had a couple go back and forwards before you go and get even more expert opinion, because it's a companion, it's a way of looking. But I wonder, how do you think it works with early years and that idea of image to image, where I know you have, and I've played around with it, and I went into a class this week where a teacher, they controlled the AI, but they took children's imagination of creatures, they drew them out, they wrote the prompt, the teacher then put that within the AI and created these mythical beasts that were a hybrid between two different characters. And that's inspired their writing for weeks because of it. And when I went in, they were so proud and so engaged with seeing actually what they envisaged in their head. And so where do you think that fits in with our youngest learners? Is there a way that we could do this safely in early years and with our young children to really inspire and engage and bring that learning and creativity out to them?
So as I already mentioned, I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old at home, and I'm biased, but they're brilliant, and I think they're mega creative. Although most 6-year-olds and 8-year-olds are at this point, but I have let them play, and by letting them play, I have done all of the actual physical inputting, but they've provided me with information. So back when he was 5 and she was 7, we did a little kitchen table project that you can find on LinkedIn if you scroll back maybe a year and a half, of creating monsters, a little bit like your mythical creature project that you were just talking about. And my 5-year-old used Oracy skills to explain to me what his, I should say they both drew a sketch just with pencil on paper, with no colour, just literally pencil and paper of their monsters. My 5-year-old then used his Oracy skills to describe the colours and the textures. He wanted it to be fluffy. He wanted it to be a cuddly monster, really. We read the Tom Fletcher books of My Little Monster and My Little Dinosaur, and you're nodding, and you think that you've got them too.
Yeah, I've got a 7, 7. How old are they? 7, 4, and 2-year-old. So everything you're saying is like these little things is that.
Yeah. So he used his Oracy skills. In other words, he told me what he wanted his monster to feel like, look like, what colours it should be, what materials it should be. He said he wanted it to be furry and fluffy and cuddly, and he wanted it to be in greens and oranges. And so I typed all that into a tool. I put his image, his sketch into the tool, and then he got his 4, 6 options. And he was so, wow. And my daughter did the same, but because she was a little bit older and because I'm a teacher with a teacher hat on, I made her write it all down, obviously. So she was using her literacy skills to write her sentences about texture and color and material. And then we entered hers in. So I've sort of differentiated by age around my kitchen table on a Sunday morning. But I was the guardrail. I was the adult in the room. They didn't touch my laptop. I did all of that. And then with older students that I had in my class, I asked them to give me things, and then I would input it. I think the only ones that I actually let input it themselves were sixth formers. At that point, it was early, and I wasn't really sure about what was safe and what wasn't safe, and what I was allowed to do and what I wasn't allowed to do. So it was quite, I did it with all ages for all different things, and with my early years own children, or my primary aged own children, it was amazing. They absolutely loved it. Like you say, the buy-in, the engagement, the enthusiasm. They loved their creatures. Incidentally, now, 2025, those creatures have recently been 3D printed, because using another AI tool, we can then take the output, the render, into another AI tool and make it into an STL file to send to a 3D printer. And I've also animated them since. So there's so this is, I'm telling you the story of that day around the kitchen table. But then since then, there's been, developments. And one of my recent LinkedIn posts, that you don't have to scroll very far back, because it was last week, was my little boy drawing a figure of a man. And then we entered the sketch in and rendered it using AI, and also animated it. And into the prompt, I used the name of a certain animation studio, which is probably against copyright, but it was for our personal use only. And then he basically made his own Pixar character. I said the word. And he was like, wow, oh my gosh, I've made my own character. And now he's 6, and he's running around saying, I'm going to make my own movie. I'm going to make my own movie. So for young users, if we put those guardrails in place and make sure everything's safe, and be sort of the gatekeeper of it, then I think that the magic and the creativity, like you said with the creative writing, is huge. But I've done the same processes with older students as well, and my pedagogical reasons for doing it have been different depending on who I've been doing it with. So with GCSE students, they might have been experimenting with texture, or iterating with color, or trying to figure out what looks good or what works, or augmenting a CAD model into different environments, or augmenting a architecture sketch into different materials. Or with sixth formers, you really push it and take complex CAD models and then render them in all sorts of different ways, and put them into different branding scenarios, and animate them, 3D print them, input the STL files into Fusion or really complex CAD programs, and expedite that process so it can be added into the complex design process. And I follow a lot of professional designers that are experimenting with this stuff, and then try and pull that back down and think, well, if professional designers are doing it in this way, how can we in the design education community be doing simplified versions with sixth form? How can we do it with Key Stage 4, 3, 2, 1, and early years? So I think the other thing I'd say about early years that I think is really important, and by early years I mean early years, like preschool, reception age, I think it's really important that we talk about AI to the students, because they're using it all the time. I don't know about you, James, but my children talk to Alexa all the time. And Alexa will, put Stephen Fry on reading Harry Potter of an evening, or play Taylor Swift really loudly in the morning. And that's AI. It's not generative AI yet, but it is AI use. And I think that through the project I was working on, the DFE materials I mentioned earlier, I was doing a lot of reading around the anthropomorphization of AI, and how children, especially young children, again, if we're not careful as educators, can get confused between what to trust and what not to trust. So are children actually having a real relationship with Alexa? in a way that actually could lead to them over trusting AI. Or there's horror stories around things. I won't say what the horror stories are, but you can go and find them, of children over trusting the outputs from AI. And I think that means that we do need to explicitly early tell students this is not a real person, this is not a human, this is a machine, and embed that critical analysis of outputs from generative AI straight out the gate. In my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
In this week's education news, The Guardian, The Standard, and several other newspapers report that the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, pledges to tackle chronic skills shortages by abolishing the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education and replacing it with a new body called Skills England. The bill, which will transfer the functions of the Apprenticeships and Technical Education Institute, reached its second reading in the House of Commons and was passed by 317 votes 55. In support of the bill, Phillipson said, "The skills gaps that we face in our country deny people the opportunity, the power and the freedom to choose the life that they want to live." Critics of the bill argued that the new body, Skills England, will not be truly independent and will not have the respect of the profession. Phillipson responded by saying this approach was necessary because of the urgency of the skills shortage. Periodical Schools Week carries the story of ex-schools inspectors who have launched the Alternative Big Consultation on Ofsted report cards. Former senior officials behind the Alternative Big Listen last year fear that current proposals to change the inspection system are being presented as take it or leave it. Frank Norris and Colin Richards have therefore created the Alternative Big Consultation to independently gather opinions on plans for new report cards. The survey, which launched this week and closes on April the 4th, will run alongside Ofsted's own official 12-week consultation, which closes on April the 28th. The Alternative Big Consultation comprises the same questions as the government's own consultation on the plans, but also asks respondents if they believe the proposals are fit for purpose. Many teachers and school leaders have expressed their view on the proposed report card model that it's hardly an improvement and contains many of the weaknesses of the previous system. Also in the news this week, the Daily Express covered a story with the title, "Save Our School Playtime." It went on to explain that experts warn of dire consequences as the break times in schools are cut. A report by the Raising the Nation Play Commission found outdoor playtime at school is being squeezed out of children's lives and must be restored. The Guardian carried a story under the headline, "Ministers urged to add audio books to England's new schools curriculum." A poll by the National Literacy Trust found that children's enjoyment of listening to audio and podcasts had risen compared to the previous year, overtaking their enjoyment of reading for the first time since the charity began asking about audio in 2020. The charity said it was therefore advocating for increased access to and a broadening of the variety of reading formats available to pupils, to include audio. Jonathan Douglas of the NLT stated, "In recent years, we've seen a steady rise in children's enjoyment of listening to audio and uncovered the myriad benefits it can bring, from sparking a love of reading to deepening learning and boosting well-being." PES Magazine reported this week that primary school PE training was woefully inadequate. As reported to MPs, the chief executive of Youth Sport Trust called for PE to become a core subject to drive up standards and improve fitness. Giving evidence to the Commons Culture, Media and Sport Committee, Ali Oliver called for PE to become a core curriculum subject with much higher status, and she told the committee that training problems were exacerbating the situation, where there were 41,000 fewer hours in 2020-23 compared to 2011 and 12. Less than half of children are getting what the chief medical officer recommends as the minimum amount of activity. More worryingly, we know that 30% of children get less than 30 active minutes a day. LBC News reported that a teacher was sacked after a joke about whacking a pupil over the head was misunderstood. Lakshmi Subrian, who had taught for over 35 years, was sacked after a school child who spoke English as a second language misunderstood the comment. The teacher was dismissed from Gilbert Colvin Primary School in Ilford, East London in 2023 following the incident. Miss Subrian took the school to an employment tribunal, claiming the remark had been made in jest while teaching Year 6 pupils and preparing them for their maths SAT exam. Speaking at the disciplinary hearing in July 2023, she said the child's decision to continue attending her after-school club showed they had not been that upset. However, she lost the appeal. Teachers' unions supporting Miss Subrian argue that this case adds to the vulnerability many teachers feel when a single ill-judged remark could end a career. And finally, a piece of research by the British Educational Research Association. Like many pieces of research, it shows something we might have always suspected was true. In their paper, A Century of Educating Britain's Political Elite, Privilege Masquerading as Meritocracy, they show how Oxbridge and private schools, called in Britain public schools, dominate the selection of cabinet ministers and prime ministers. Oxbridge educated 14 of 21 prime ministers between 1922 and 2022. Unsurprisingly, they conclude that the concentration of elite formation systems raises concerns that their graduates will suffer from groupthink. Analysing a series of important decisions made across the 20th century, it seems certain attitudes, such as the necessity to accept neoliberalist economics, the importance of Britain as a world power, and above all, the acceptance of class privilege itself, go unchallenged. Well, there's a surprise. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News, brought to you by John Gibbs.
AI is here, whether we like it or not. And if we don't open the conversation now with our youngest of learners and all the way through, there is a danger that they will have a whole wealth of tools that they can access anyway. The moment they have a device with any internet connection, and even there are devices now which don't need an internet connection to have AI. And actually, it is that connection. I think that's a whole topic on its own that we could dive into.
Yeah.
And I was talking to someone about the other day about as we start to emphasize AI more and more, is it going to be harder then for us to be critical with it? And with where robots and what Tesla's doing and what other people are doing, at the moment, sometimes it's easier for us as teachers saying, oh yeah, I'll ignore that bit, I'll do that. But I think over time, and depending how we interact with it, if it's a coach or if it's or whatever chatbots we use, there is a danger that we stop being critical of it.
Yeah, and then there's a danger that children can strike up emotional relationships with machines, essentially. I know it sounds like a sci-fi film, but it's happening now where children can get confused and think it's their actual friend, and people can fall in love, and all of these sorts of things that we have to safeguard against by sort of making sure that metacognition, I suppose, of teaching really, really early, this isn't the person. And because of that, these are the, it can get things wrong, and we need to sort of introduce that at the same time as stranger danger, I think. I mean, my daughter gave me a real telling off the other night for not saying thank you to Alexa. I said, Alexa, turn off. And she went, oh, Mummy, say thank you to her. And I went, oh, red flag. That's kind of what I've been reading about, and it's happening in my own house. Oh my gosh. So I sort of sat her down and said, I'm really happy, proud of you that you're reminding me to say my pleases and thank yous. But Alexa's not a real person. She's not really a she. It's an it. And we had this whole conversation, and I did, as a parent, sort of educated what I think maybe needs to be part of our curriculum across the board, and an awareness of that.
Yeah, I think that is. And we've just had a comment in that I think is actually quite relevant to where we're looking. And JBL put, AI in the hands of teachers like you, Trudy, could be ultra effective, but teachers who aren't technically competent can seriously struggle. And I know you're working with the DFE and others in terms of this AI literacy and those guiding principles. But I wonder what your initial thoughts on how, let's think about the implementation or the understanding from teachers. What do you think are some of the basic things that we should all know around the use of AI and the integration of it?
I think that at this point, I think all teachers should have tried it for themselves, because virtually all students have. So I do think there's a responsibility for teachers of what generation are they? Gen Alpha, to sort of realize that this is a different generation growing up in a different time, and therefore we have to acknowledge that and stay up to date. So I think there's a professional responsibility to enhance our digital literacy as much as we possibly can, and that CPD on digital literacy has to be big right now in 2025. And in that digital literacy now, we have to be trained to understand the ramifications of AI, but also the benefits to us as educators for using these tools. So I completely agree with this comment that it could become a chasm between educators who are flying with this, using it all the time, and using it in their own practice and lesson planning and work, and automating a lot of their own processes, as well as providing students with opportunities. And then those teachers that are nervous of this. I do think, though, that is, it's massive right now because it's such a big topic, but I do think you could argue that it's the same as when computers first came out and teachers suddenly had to understand word processing, or Excel spreadsheets first were expected to be understood by teachers, or a school suddenly becomes a Google school and everybody gets Google Classroom, or an Apple school or a Microsoft school or whatever, and they start to use these ed tech programs. I think that school leadership has a responsibility, in my opinion, to train its staff to be up to date with digital literacy across the board. And hopefully projects like the DFE Chiltern Learning Project that I'm currently working on will help with that. And I know that there are other major projects that are being done on a big scale to provide resources and training materials for teachers. I know that there are some of the big ed tech providers and some of the big organizations, like the ones I just mentioned, are providing their own training materials, often for free. But as I said earlier, one of the most valuable commodities in education is time. So I think that it's really down to school leadership to understand that digital literacy is something that has to be a priority, and make time. That's easier said than done, because there's also all sorts of priorities in schools. but it is being used by the students, and we do have a responsibility to stay up to date. And I say that a lot to design and technology teachers. Design and technology is your subject title. If you're not up to date with technology and technological advancement, you're letting your subject title down. But I do think that it's every educator's responsibility.
Yeah. And going back to this idea of creativity, my oldest, who's 7, and he's almost like a typical boy, a little reluctant to write, but his imagination is great because he loves to read or he loves listening to stories. And every time we go to swimming on a Saturday morning, we drive down the hill near the Malverns, and ever so often it's foggy, so you can't see the Malverns. And we've just joked this idea that actually the giant stolen the Malverns. And it was last weekend when they were ill, we were creating an ebook, and that started from a sketch to creating it. And that's really inspired him, and it's given him, he's been able to iterate because actually it's not what he wanted, but he likes that idea. So we went down that route, and it's fascinating. And when we get all our cousins, brother-in-law's got a 3D printer, and there's 5 of them. And last time I did like a video project with them, with the boys, and they were editing and doing stuff. But yeah, I know next time we're going to be creating these little 3D models, print those overnight, and characters. So we'll have them somewhere. We'll get that going. But I wonder then, because there is a danger, well, especially when you start using AI to do your thinking for you, put something in, you take it straight away. So how can we guide students and teachers to use AI as a tool for exploration rather than just a shortcut to get to that final product or output that we want?
The first thing I say about that is your story about the Malvern Hills is a gorgeous story, and it reminded me of a story that I've told a lot of my little girl when she was 6. So yeah, 2 years ago. We were reading The Magic Faraway Tree at night, and we ended up, through my research and my playing with EdTech and AI, we ended up spending this magical hour, like your time about the giant stole the Malvern Hills. We spent this magical hour creating an immersive room within a tool that could do 360 image generation, and then linking into that other AI generated images. And one thing that really struck me, and I think you alluded to this, is how the younger students are not prepared to take the first response. They are very keen on iterating. We had to create, in this little project we set ourselves, I don't know if anybody's ever read The Magic Faraway Tree or knows the story, but there's a character called Moonface, and he has a face that looks like the moon. And he's smartly dressed, and he's described in the story. And so we generated an image of Moonface, and we came up with the prompt together. And it was a lovely conversation with juicy vocabulary. And I was really proud of her because, you know, we were sort of saying, can we think of another word for that? Can we think of another word for that? And we were just iterating. But she, age 6, was adamant that I hadn't got it right, or that the AI hadn't got it right. And she said, well, his nose would be narrower than that. That's not what he looks like. Enter this in, or what's another word for this, or how can we change it? So her determination to get it how it was in her mind's eye was quite, I remember thinking, oh, wow, okay, this is different with the younger students to the older students who, you know, to then come back to your question, maybe, and I don't want to paint all teenagers out as lazy, because that's a stereotype that gets bandied around a lot, but they potentially could be more likely to go, yeah, all right, that'll do, for the first answer. But then I think it's our job as educators to instill those critical thinking. I mean, in design and technology, we have a brief, we have a specification that students would work to. So we would, you know, in that process of, we would sort of encourage students to have a brief and specification within their prompt almost, and say, has this output actually met your criteria? Does it actually do what you want it to do, whatever the output is, whether it's written or image or an augmented world or whatever. But I think that the word shortcut in your question is interesting, because that implies that you're only using AI to get to the point that you would have got without it. And I don't think that's necessarily true with artificial intelligence, because in the creative use of artificial intelligence, you might find that it takes you in a different direction. I don't think that it could, within creativity, if you're really using AI within creativity, then you're going to be using it creatively, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I think, the premise of the question would be, well, no, I don't think it would be a shortcut, because that implies that it would get you to where you were going anyway. And you probably won't get to where you were going anyway. You probably, with your companion and your collaboration, you might find new creative avenues to go down.
And I think that's the key thing. If you think about the early years or think about science technology, creativity comes when you've got parameters to work with it, whether it is a design brief or something else. And that's where true creativity came. If you give someone a blank piece of paper, they're not going to explore things in a different way, look at different textures, look at different structures within it. How could I reinvent a chair or something else? And actually, I think that's where, when you start using it within those parameters as a companion, you won't be happy with the first output. I think there is a danger on the first use of it. If you never have used AI or you haven't thought critically about it, actually, they'll just take it. And I think this idea of critical thinking is really, really important. And we need to make sure, go back to our conversation earlier about novices and experts, we need to be expert in things and use it to support that. And we could be iterative with it. And I agree with you. I don't think there is a danger that we'll be happy with just the outcome. But I think there are times when people will just copy and paste or say, right, we're happy. And I think that's something we've got to instill within our students and our teachers as well.
Yes. And there was a question about the problem truly is that teenagers will always be way ahead of us older teachers. They use tech tools all day long. I think that's always been the case. I think that, our generation were using social media before teachers were. Facebook was used by university-age students long before it was used by my parents' generation, who now seem to dominate it. Or they do in my life anyway. So I think that sometimes there's always been the students get there first, but I don't think that's a reason not to do it. I think that just means that we have to try our very best to stay up to date with it, and also do our due diligence on the health and safety implications, so that within a school setting, we know that the access to AI is safe and guardrailed, and we can also teach the philosophy behind the critical thinking, the philosophy behind the de-anthropomorphization, and the ethics, all of those things, bias, all of these things need to be addressed head on in schools, so that when the students are running with this in ways that maybe we can't even imagine, they at least have that foundational ethical understanding of what's right, what's wrong, and how to do it safely. But also, I do think that it does have some amazing opportunities for us as educators to help us. There are some fantastic tools for workload reduction and lesson planning and ideas and resource generation. So there's a lot of opportunities, but yeah, I think that question, I think it's always happened in one way or another.
Yeah. And I just want to say thank you for the 200 people who are listening live to this, and also to our sponsors who make this possible. Kielo, who's a BET award-winning It's a 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. Students can instantly and simultaneously create an interactive map discussions, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make a world a more thoughtful place. So join them today at Kialo, so KIALO-edu.com. And this show is also brought to you in partnership with John Catt Education, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. And just last week, I had Zach Groschel on with me talking about his book as well, about just get them talking about instructional design and what that looked like. So visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles and use the code JCTTR2425. That's JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Now, one of the things with AI and with design and the world at the moment is this idea of sustainability and designing for the future. And it's got a huge potential, I think, of creating sustainable solutions, whether through material selection or through iteration and through almost prototyping, and the fact that actually we could be a bit more efficient in that process. So where do you think AI fits with that in creating a more sustainable product or solutions or design process even?
So, as you said in your very lovely introduction of me, other than AI in design education, one of my other sort of major passions is climate change education and sustainability in education. And I struggled for a little while of marrying the two together, because obviously when we generate an image, which is, so, as I said, my starting point into this, that there is implications to the power that we use, more power than maybe the average user would recognize, because it's not tangible. Our impact on the environment when we use AI is not tangible like it is if we buy a plastic bottle and put it in the normal bin instead of the recycling bin. We can see that, we can feel that. We can get berated by our children for that, which I do or have been known to in the past. But because there's no tangibility to the impact of AI on the environment, it's not easily accessible. We sort of, this is part of our responsibility to teach that, is, do you actually need to render this image in this way? Does it have benefit? Or are you just doing it for fun, or thinking about it? In the same way that, would you boil your kettle all day long? No, you wouldn't. You'd boil your kettle when you needed the hot water. So there's just sort of that to bear in mind. But there is also this amazing opportunity that AI can read and filter through data so much faster than we've ever been able to do before. So the impacts of AI in the medical world and in the sustainability world are huge for positive good, because we can process things quicker than we've ever been able to process before. So the what I would consider to be one of the major problems of our time, there's an organization called Design Declares that calls it the biggest brief of our time, is the climate emergency. And to address that brief, if you like, to address that problem or solve that problem, we've now got this collaborator that can process data fast, can come up with new solutions, and can use our existing knowledge of a situation and push it forward. So I think that there's two sides to the relationship between AI and sustainability. There's the everyday use of AI and the impact right now on the environment from the big servers and the use of water, the use of electricity. But then there's also this, well, yes, but it could potentially help us solve some of these problems, and it could help us address some of these things. So it's a really difficult one. And I think it's a conversation that isn't had enough really in the AI education community. It is mentioned a little bit, and I do try to talk about it because I'm still not quite sure about it, because obviously I'm so excited about taking a sketch and then turning it into a beautiful render and then animating it and then taking that animation and turning it into an STL file and then 3D printing it and then going back again. And that's amazing. Look at the learning opportunities and the opportunities for students, the opportunities for me. But then there's that sort of underlying, how much power did I use to go through that process that I've not seen? And did I actually have to go through that process for a benefit of who's going to benefit? And it's a balancing act, isn't it? So it's a difficult one.
And it's a difficult one because we don't see it. And I think that's the hard thing. We don't sometimes see the immediate impact of the environmental or the sustainability. Actually, we need to make sure that is part of the conversation from now almost to really bring it into the forefront to see. Because I think for me, I can see sustainability in terms of the feedback is really important. That your initial idea is always something you're going to be iterative about, however you approach it. But I think having it as a thought partner to go through a project or to go through something back and forwards, to create a prototype and 3D print that in something like that before you even go to manufacture it, that whole manufacturing side of it is going to be really exciting. Actually, it's going to hopefully streamline it and have products that we don't have this throwaway culture. And I think there's too often we have things and throw them away in single use. And I think actually this could potentially open up new opportunities in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that this new generation coming through, Generation Alpha, are coming into a world with climate anxiety all around them. And, primary education is really hot on sustainability across the curriculum. So when the current primary cohort come into secondary, we'll see that knock-on of sustainability being right at the forefront of young people's minds, at the same time that AI is at the forefront of their minds. And so that relationship between the two is inevitable, whether it be that one solves the problem of the other or whether it be that one makes the other worse, is sort of this ongoing balancing act.
Excellent. So we've obviously covered an awful lot, and I think there will be things that tonight we could go into even more depth and explore. But I wonder what your thoughts are, or considerations probably, in a rhetorical sense, about AI in the assessment realm, especially when we're looking at creative work that's very subjective to opinions, or whether it is against the design brief. Does it fit? Does it have a role? Or is it something that actually we shouldn't be considering, and that we should still keep the human in the loop in that element as well?
So the assessment of subjective arts and creative outputs is incredibly hard. I found this time of year over my career an incredibly difficult time of year, where you had to mark, and many teachers will be doing this right now, marking NEAs and pieces of coursework, and trying to balance them and moderate them with colleagues, and trying to moderate them across schools, and trying to do it right with a limited assessment criteria and loads of subjective information. So assessment of creative outputs is incredibly hard anyway. I haven't explored using AI to enhance that, but what I directly myself, it's an area that I think needs a bit of research and exploration into, because there's a lot of research in and work being done on exploring AI in assessment, full stop. But when it becomes really subjective, there's not much research into that yet. But what I would say is that an output from AI is only ever as good as the input that you give it. So if you're going to be using AI for assessment, you have to provide it with a really robust assessment criteria with no wiggle room, and then do trial and error with it for a while, sort of product testing, if you like, before then becoming reliant on it. So I think that's up to the educator to make sure that the prompt is robust, the assessment criteria that the AI is using is robust, and then to test it and test it and test it before ever relying on artificial intelligence to assess work, especially creative work. But as I said, it's not an area that I've experimented with yet, but that's how I would start.
So start, really good pivot into what would you say is the one thing you want teachers to take away from this in terms of AI and design technology and creativity and what we've discussed tonight? What's that one thing you want teachers to think about or start doing or could start doing around this?
I think that don't be scared of it. I think, entry level into artificial intelligence within design education specifically, don't be afraid of it. Don't assume that it has to be used in every lesson. Don't assume that it's going to come and take away from your fundamental value as an educator. You are still the most powerful tool in the room for educating those young people. This is just another way to support you, to expedite the process, and to give our learners new opportunities. So I would say, don't be afraid of it. Have a go with it. It doesn't need to be used all the time, but it does need to be acknowledged, taught. The safety of it needs to, and the ethics need to be taught explicitly. And I do think that we have a responsibility as educators to stay up to date with the world that this generation live in. And I believe that every generation lives in a completely different world. We grew up with mobile phones and social media, and then as we got older, we started to realize that these things became addictive, and we didn't really realize that until it had happened. And this new generation have got all of these other new things. We cannot provide Generation Alpha with a millennial curriculum. We just can't. We have to stay up to date, and we have a responsibility to learn about these things. And I think that government realize that, and big organizations realize that, exam boards realize that, and I think we're going to start to see these new approaches to this CPD to take away that fear and to give teachers the confidence to address this stuff head on. And like I said, not in every lesson, but to use it as a tool to support them as well as talking about it with the students.
Beautifully put. Don't be scared. Don't use it. But it's our responsibility to be aware. And I think it's really well done.
And also have a play.
Yeah.
Play. Come
don't be scared.
One of my other experiments. Just play with it. See what happens, and you might surprise yourself with what the outputs that you get.
And there is huge opportunity to really redefine what we can do as well. So it's an exciting time to have a look. And thank you so much, Trudy, for what has been a fascinating conversation on Teachers Talk Radio tonight. If you want to listen to this show back, we will be available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Podbean, any of your favorite podcast players. And please have a look at the rest of the shows on ttradio.org. Thank you to our sponsors, Kirio and also John Catt Publishers, who this wouldn't be possible without. But thank you for everyone who is listening and live, and we look forward to continuing this conversation.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.